We've all agreed. You're not invited to your father's birthday, my mother, Teresa, said with a smug smile. Good to know, I replied. I transferred the 5,000 euros from the family vacation fund back into my account and canceled the trip I had booked for my father. By morning, I had 36 missed calls and a message from my brother that changed everything. Trip canceled. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you're having a good day wherever you are. I'd love for you to share in the comments what city or country you're watching this from and what time it is there. Let's start our story together. My father, Ramon Medina, is the kind of man who defines his life by quiet sacrifices. He's not one for grand gestures or loud proclamations, but his love for our family has always been a constant, unwavering current beneath the surface of our lives. For his upcoming 60th birthday, I wanted to do something that finally shouted what he had always whispered, that he was loved, that his efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. I, Mateo, his eldest son, was determined to make this milestone unforgettable. For months, my apartment transformed into a secret command center. Spreadsheets detailed budgets, browser tabs housed endless research on fishing cabins, and my nights were filled with the soft click of the keyboard as I assembled the perfect celebration. The crown jewel was a surprise 7-day trip to a remote, spectacularly beautiful cabin in the Pyrenees, a place he once dreamt aloud about, almost unintentionally. I could picture his expression, the rare, overflowing joy. I meticulously arranged all the bookings. The non-refundable deposits were already paid from a joint account I had created years ago called the Medina Family Fund. It was mostly funded by me, a silent way of contributing, and for this trip, I had set aside 5,000 euros, a significant sum I had painstakingly saved. Beyond the trip, there was also the party, a backyard barbecue at his house, catered by Catherine, a guest list composed of his oldest friends and our scattered family. I was preparing a montage of memories with photos pulled from dusty albums and forgotten digital folders, and I'd found a classic fishing rod, lovingly restored at an antique market. It shimmered with a history I knew he would appreciate. This desire to contribute, to smooth tensions, wasn't new. I'd helped my younger brother, Hugo, with the down payment on his first car, a flashy sports car he clearly couldn't afford on his own. I'd co-signed rental agreements, mediated disputes, and, more often than I should have, silently covered the costs of family events my parents wished to host for appearances, but couldn't realistically afford. It had become a pattern, small concessions to my mother's seemingly harmless requests, all in the name of peace. A peace I was beginning to understand often came at my expense. The weight of their expectations was like a familiar, almost comfortable cloak I had never questioned until recently. How could the woman who taught me to tie my shoes, whose lullabies were the soundtrack of my earliest memories, harbor such calculated intent beneath her carefully constructed facade of maternal devotion? Mom, Teresa, at first feigned enthusiasm when I outlined my plans. Oh, Mateo, that sounds lovely, she'd said, her smile a little too bright. But soon came the suggestions, minor changes she called them, that somehow always shifted the focus, inflated the budget which I was expected to cover, or steered my carefully laid plans toward her own preferences. When I excitedly showed her the brochure for the Pyrenees cabin, with its photos of crystal-clear lakes and snow-capped peaks, she sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, but one I knew all too well. The Pyrenees, darling, she said, with that maternal sweetness that could turn a criticism into a caress, sounds a bit rustic for your father, don't you think? And so far, if something were to happen. Then she patted my hand, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than affection. Hugo, ever Mom's echo, chimed in right on cue. Yeah, Mateo, Mom's right. Maybe something simpler. Dad's not so young anymore, you know. He leaned back, already picturing himself as the charming host of a party Mom would inevitably end up controlling. His concern for Dad was as superficial as the cheap cologne he used to wear. A few weeks later, I had a brief call with Aunt Pilar, Dad's younger sister, who lived in another region. I'd always appreciated her direct nature and no-nonsense kindness. After cautiously telling her some of my plans and Mom's influence, Aunt Pilar paused. "Your mother has good intentions, dear. In her own way," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "But you know Teresa, she likes things done her way. Just make sure your father's actual wishes are heard in all of this." At the time, I laughed it off, assured her I had it all under control. Her words, however, planted a small seed of unease, a whisper that harmonized with my growing disquiet. I tried to bury those feelings. "You're being too sensitive," I told myself, staring at the ceiling at night, the smell of old photo albums still clinging to my fingers after an evening spent selecting pictures for the presentation. "It's your mother. She just wants what's best." I even voiced this to my best friend, Clara, during a coffee date one Saturday. Clara, with her blessed frankness, arched a skeptical eyebrow. "What's best for whom, Mateo? For your father, or for her image as the perfect matriarch orchestrating the perfect party?" I shifted uncomfortably, defended her with the usual lines about her good intentions, but Clara's question lingered, an uncomfortable itch beneath the surface of my filial loyalty. The tangible details of planning were my refuge. The crisp texture of the plane tickets for my father and me, the satisfying click of the confirmation on the cabin's website, the warm, slightly musty smell of the antique shop where I found the fishing rod, all of it was real. It was my love for my father-made material. I imagined the aroma of his favorite chocolate cake, the one I planned to order from his old neighborhood bakery, mingling with the smoky scent of the barbecue. I pictured his rough, strong hand running along the smooth wood of the restored rod. Those were the moments I was working towards, the genuine joy I wanted to evoke, in stark contrast to the hollow, carefully polished perfection my mother seemed to be aiming for. But a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, a premonition that the path to that joy was increasingly treacherous, paved with my mother's subtle smiles and obstructions. The small seeds of doubt Aunt Pilar had unintentionally planted began to sprout with alarming speed. Mom's suggestions became orders, her subtle undermining a more overt campaign to seize control of my father's 60th birthday. I discovered it by accident, through a forwarded email. A separate chat group had been created, titled Dad's Big 60 Surprise, a group from which I, the original architect of that surprise, was conspicuously absent. My stomach lurched, nausea mixed with anger. I casually inquired with Hugo, feigning curiosity. He just shrugged. "Mom set it up. Just for making quick decisions and stuff. Don't be weird." Quick decisions that had apparently served to systematically dismantle all of my plans. The local bakery where I'd placed the order for Dad's favorite cake? Cancelled. "Oh, honey," she crooned when I confronted her, her voice like sugar soaked in arsenic. "Your choice was a bit simple, don't you think? We want it to be really special." She proudly announced she'd commissioned a massive, elaborately decorated cake from a fancy downtown bakery, a cake Dad would likely find overwhelming, and that cost nearly double, an expense she subtly implied I should absorb. "It's for your father, Mateo. Surely you want the best for him." That signature sigh of hers, laden with false emotional weight, punctuated the sentence. The financial pressure mounted. Despite my hefty contribution to the Pyrenees trip and the initial party fund, Mom began making comments about how much Hugo was helping with the real work. "Making a few calls, those little online bookings are one thing, Mateo," she'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "But this, real effort, real involvement." Then came the request, direct access to the Medina Family Fund, to cover minor party expenses. My instinct screamed no. I managed to reach a compromise. I transferred a small, specific amount to her personal account for some decorations she insisted on buying, but I retained control of the main fund. That was for Dad and for the Pyrenees. A line I wasn't willing to cross yet. Trying to speak directly to her was like fighting smoke. "Mom," I said one night, my voice controlled, "I feel like I'm being shut out of Dad's party planning." "What happened to the catering I hired, the chat group?" She responded with that theatrical sigh that always made me feel like an ungrateful child. Oh, Mateo, always so dramatic. It was just for making quick decisions Hugo and I needed to make. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, honestly. You overcomplicate things sometimes. And, of course, the inevitable emotional manipulation. Family isn't about keeping score, dear. It's about being together, supporting each other. Togetherness, apparently, meant unquestioning obedience to her. Desperate, I tried to talk to Dad. I found him in his workshop, the scent of sawdust and old wood filling the air, a familiar refuge. Dad, I began, my throat tight. Mom is taking over everything. I'm afraid this isn't what you really want. He didn't look up from the bird feeder he was sanding, his shoulders seeming even more slumped than usual. Your mother just wants everything to go well, son, he murmured, his voice tired. She gets carried away sometimes. Let her handle it. Don't make a fuss. Those words were like a physical blow. Don't make a fuss. That's all my efforts were worth. I looked around the workshop, the neatly ordered tools, the half-finished projects that spoke of his quiet passions. This was his sanctuary, and out there, in the main house, my mother was systematically erasing me from the celebration of his life. The photos on the living room mantelpiece, capturing decades of carefully constructed happiness, suddenly seemed like the set of a play I was no longer invited to perform in. Every smiling face seemed to mock me, a silent accusation. Hugo, meanwhile, relished his role as Mom's favored lieutenant. He strutted around with an air of superiority, dropping hints about the incredible party they were putting together. His Instagram stories were filled with vague, self-congratulatory messages. Big things coming for Dad, #exemplary son, #family first. The irony was hard to swallow. He even had the audacity to confront me one afternoon when I tried to discuss the playlist I'd curated, filled with Dad's favorite classic songs. Leave it to Mom, dude, he'd said, snatching the sheet from me with an air of unearned authority. You're stressing everyone out with your intensity. The use of the word intensity felt like a direct quote from Mom. I'd overheard it in one of those planning sessions I was, of course, not invited to, but listened in on from the hallway. There, she'd casually dismissed a small, thoughtful idea Hugo himself had proposed, a tribute to Dad's old college band. Oh, how sweet, Hugo, she'd said, in her most condescending tone, but it's a bit too specific, don't you think? We have to keep it more general. I saw a flicker of surprise, then hurt, in Hugo's eyes before he quickly masked it with a nod. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He was just another piece in her game, albeit a more willing one. My breaking point, the moment when the dull resentment sharpened into pure pain, came a week before the scheduled party. I drove to my parents' house, clinging to a sliver of hope that I could salvage some part of my original vision. I walked in unannounced and found Mom, Hugo, and a few distant relatives I barely knew flitting around the living room like a well-oiled machine, finalizing decorations I'd never seen and discussing a catering service I'd never heard of. The air was thick with the scent of artificial flowers and the cloying, synthetic vanilla of some scented candles Mom had lit. Teresa greeted me with a bright, fake smile plastered across her face. Mateo, how lovely that you could finally make it, dear, she said. She gestured to a stack of folding chairs against the wall. You can help by setting up the chairs in the garden. The casualness of that dismissal, the public humiliation in front of strangers who were now witnesses to my demotion from chief organizer to errand boy, made my chest constrict, as though my torso were wrapped in barbed wire. My own home, the place where I took my first steps, where we celebrated countless holidays, suddenly felt alien. Every carefully chosen decorative object, every framed photograph, felt like an accusation. I muttered a vague excuse and left. The list of menial tasks she'd attempted to press into my hand remained on the hall table, untouched. That thin piece of paper felt like the last fragile thread of my patience. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice, that sweetly false tone that always preceded a demand or a veiled criticism, sounded smooth. Mateo, darling, can you come over this afternoon? We need to have a little family chat about the party. Just us. A family chat. My stomach churned. I knew, with chilling certainty, that this would not be a reconciliation. It felt like a summons, the final act of a play I no longer wanted to participate in. But a tiny, foolish part of me, the part that still yearned for the mother I thought I had, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to clear the air. All right, Mom, I replied, my voice carefully neutral. I'll be there around 3. When I arrived, they were already waiting in the living room. Mom, Dad, and Hugo. The air was thick with unspoken words, heavy like before a thunderstorm. Dad was slumped in his usual armchair, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the window, pointedly avoiding my eyes. Hugo, perched on the edge of the sofa, wore an expression of smugness that made my fists clench. Mom, however, was the picture of serenity. A slight, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. It was the smile of a chess player who knows she's about to deliver checkmate. She let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring it, before beginning. Mateo, she said, her voice soft, yet edged with an undeniable steeliness. We've been talking, and well, with your recent attitude, with that negativity, it's become clear that you're not actually committed to making this a happy, unified celebration for your father. She gestured vaguely towards Hugo, who puffed his chest slightly. Hugo, on the other hand, has been a pillar. He really understands what your father needs right now. He's put so much heart into all of this. My own heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird seeking escape. I could feel the blood draining from my face. I wanted to shout. I wanted to rail against the injustice, but a strange, icy calm was beginning to settle over me. Mom took a deep breath, her smile widening into that characteristic smirk I had come to loathe. It was the expression of undisguised triumph. So, she continued, lowering her voice to almost a conspiratorial whisper, as though sharing a delightful secret. We've all agreed, and it was a unanimous decision. For your father's sake, of course, she paused. You're not invited to your father's birthday. The words hung in the air like poison darts. Not invited. To my own father's 60th birthday, the celebration I'd poured my heart, soul, and savings into. Dad remained silent, his profile rigid, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Hugo nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of feigned solemnity and poorly concealed satisfaction. A moment of stunned silence. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. And then, something inside me snapped. Not in an explosion of fury, but in a silent, decisive break. Years of swallowing my pride, seeking an approval that was always just out of reach, it all morphed into something cold and sharp, lodged in my gut. The pain was still there, a raw wound, but now coated in a layer of icy resolve. I held Mom's gaze, my expression unreadable. Good to know, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, not a single tremor, though inside, I was vibrating. I reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling slightly, though my voice was firm. Given this new arrangement, I said, looking at the screen, I'll be making a few adjustments. The banking app opened with a sound that sliced through the silence. Tap, swipe, confirm. The 5,000 euros I'd set aside for Dad's trip, gone. I showed them the transfer, the cancellations, the accommodation, the guide, the private flight, all voided. The penalties mine. Teresa's smile fractured into fury. You wouldn't dare, she shrieked. That money was for your father, Hugo added, rising to his feet. Really? I expected that. I cut him off, finally looking at Dad. Or did you just expect what Mom told you to expect? I took a deep breath. I love you, Dad. This was all for you. But I won't be the doormat anymore. I stood up. Enjoy the party you organized. And I walked out, the door clicking shut with a final, resounding thud. In the car, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over for a moment, just to breathe. Back at my apartment, the silence enveloped me like a refuge. I turned off my phone. Hours later, Turning it back on, I had 36 missed calls. Most from Mom, some from Hugo, one from Dad. Only one voicemail. His voice sounded uncertain. "Son, maybe we should talk." "Call me." I couldn't. Not yet. The wounds were too fresh. Then, a message from Hugo. "Mateo, I messed up. Badly. Mom's been lying. Not just the party. I found something. You have to see it. It's serious. Call me." It changes everything. Against every instinct, I agreed to meet him the next morning at a downtown cafe, away from the familiar spotlight. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a corner table, pale and drawn. When he saw me, guilt washed over his face. "Thanks for coming," he mumbled, stirring his cold coffee. "What's so important?" I asked, my voice cold. He took a shaky breath. "After you left, Mom exploded. But not about Dad. About how you'd ruined her plans, her image. It was brutal." He lowered his voice. "Last night, I went into her study. I don't know why. I guess I felt. I don't know. She's always been very secretive about that antique desk Dad restored for her. One of the drawers was always locked. But in her fury, she left it unlocked, and I remembered where she hid the copy." He pushed a thin folder across the table. My name was written on it in Mom's looping script. "Look inside," he said, his voice trembling. I opened it. Emails, notes, years of manipulation. Messages with her best friend, talking about my independence, how she made sure she remained the emotional center of Dad's life. Comments about keeping Hugo loyal, making up stories about me to the family. "It wasn't just the party," Hugo whispered. "She's been manipulating all of us, especially you and Dad, for years. To control him. To control us." At the bottom of the folder, there was a faded envelope, my name written on it in my grandmother Manuela's elegant, shaky handwriting. She'd been dead for 10 years. The postmark was from a week before her passing. The seal was intact. With trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Mateo, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. There are things your mother may never tell you. You have always had a luminous spirit and a kind heart, but I fear that kindness may be mistaken for weakness. Teresa, your mother, can be overwhelming. I have set up a small fund for you. Nothing lavish, but enough to give you a little freedom when the time is right. I've asked Teresa to communicate this to you. Use it well. Live fully, and never let anyone dim your light." I sat there, frozen. 10 years. And she'd hidden it from me. "There's more," Hugo murmured. He'd found the financial documents. The fund existed, barely touched. Mom knew. She'd always known. It wasn't about a party anymore. It was about a lifetime of emotional and financial manipulation. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. "Because it's wrong, Mateo," he said, meeting my eyes. "And I'm sick of being her puppet." That same afternoon, I called Dad. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. And Mom needs to be there too." The atmosphere in the living room was dense. Hugo stood beside me, silent. I laid the evidence on the table. The emails, Hugo's testimony, Grandma's letter, the fund statements. Mom tried her usual tactics. Denied, shouted, feigned hurt. "This is ridiculous. How can you do this to me, Mateo? He's misinterpreting everything." But this time, her words weren't enough. Dad picked up his mother's letter, his hands shaking as he read it. Then he looked at the emails, his face ashen. He looked at Teresa, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. "All these years, my mother, my son, how could you, Teresa? Was any of it real?" He turned to me, his eyes mirroring the same hurt I felt. "I'm sorry, Mateo. I was blind. I didn't protect you. The big birthday party never happened. The Pyrenees trip remained canceled, but Dad and I talked about going someday, just the two of us." Teresa's social mask shattered, at least within the family. Dad started therapy. I began the legal process to access my grandmother's fund. It wasn't about the money. It was about honoring her memory, about reclaiming what had been taken from me. My relationship with Hugo is still rebuilding, but we talk now, really talk, for the first time in years. The family I thought I had turned out to be largely a carefully constructed illusion. Shattering it hurt more than anything, but from the wreckage, something authentic began to emerge. I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm planning a quiet trip now, not to a luxurious cabin, but to a simple one by a lake. A trip for healing, a celebration of my reclaimed story. Because sometimes, to be free, we have to leave behind the roles others assign us and chart the map of our own hearts.